Well, Mr. Board.
Okay, I'm here now.
Okay. Well,
Can you
I
hear me?
guess we're starting right now at this moment, and I just want to take this moment to thank everyone for taking their time today to take a look at the film. And I have to say, it's quite rewarding to make this film. What, probably like 18 years ago, and to see that people are still not only interested in the story, but seeing, of course, my production of the story time and time again. I mean, filmmakers work so hard to produce a film that would somewhat live the test of time. And I have to say, I've been truly rewarded and blessed to have produced something like this.
Oh,
And
yeah.
so I thank you all again for taking a moment to see the film and to join us, of course, in what I believe is going to be a great conversation. So we know that not. I'm sorry. So with I want to try to introduce a good friend of mine, Mr. Herb Boyd. Many of you probably know Herb from his great work as a journalist, civil rights journalist, as well as an author of a number of books. And so it's always great to see you, Herb, and to participate in such great panels that we have done together over the years. And so I know both of us are still in somewhat mourning of Sabira Cole, of the Sabira, of course, Film Fest that we're participating in today. And so I want to pay homage to her and thank her family for continuing her mission as well. Mr. Boyd, you want to say anything?
Oh, well, first of all, being with you, Keith, and you sound like my PR man there anyway, but I certainly appreciate the opportunity to be with you and to honor Sabira. And kudos also to City of Asylum.
Yes.
And I mean, all of the people who I was just following, a lot of the people who were tagging it, Keith, and following their commentaries and what they were saying about it. And some of them seeing the film for the first time,
Mm,
and I'm just hoping that continues to resonate. I mean, because we've been with this project for quite a while, at least. You know, you brought me aboard, and we've worked on so many other documentaries in terms of cold cases and what have you. But I think this is pretty much the apogee, the crowning achievement for you. And it's good that the City Asylum and the folks there with Sabir and Ogechi have saw and this opportunity to present this platform and allow a lot of people to come in and see how absolutely contemporary, because Mamie, as far as I'm concerned, is the is the first element of social media because
yes.
what she did was provide us a very, very graphic presentation by opening that casket and showing the world how her son had been brutalized. Now, here today, we live in a time in which we see constantly, daily, these here same elements of brutality coming out from our law enforcement agency of all places.
Yes.
We're supposed to be employed to protect us, but turns out to be every time you turn around, it's an attack from them, and we're losing more and more young African Americans unarmed, presenting no threat. Cops need no provocation, as we know that very well.
Yes, sir.
So let me just stop at this point and maybe let's entertain some of the questions that some of the viewers might have. Of course, I feel like losing Simeon, you know, 4 or 5 years, 3 or 4 years ago, and to see him again on the screen here, it just brings back so many memories. And he provided, he demystified a lot of things about this whole case, as you know so well, Keith.
Yes, yes. Well, the film, I just want to give a little background information about myself and my journey to tell this story. The
Hmm.
untold story of Emmett Lewis Till took me 9 years to make. I know a lot of people are surprised when they hear this. The reason why it took so long is because witnesses were afraid to talk at one time. And then there were some, like Mr. Wright, Simeon Wright, that you just mentioned, the cousin of Emmett Till. He didn't want to speak to the media. It actually took me 9 years to make the film and 3 years to get Mr. Simeon Wright to even speak to me on the phone and trust me enough to tell his story. So I'm glad that you mentioned his name because I owe the success of finding witnesses and getting them to come forward to speak to me. I owe that all to Mr. Wright. I've always felt that he was the missing link to me finding all these witnesses that you see actually in the film and was part of course, the FBI investigation in 2004. So I do have to acknowledge that. And I guess I could talk about my experience meeting Mother Mobley. Um, she was the driving force in my life. In the early 90s is when I decided to take on this task of telling this story. And the first person I reached out to was Mother Mobley, Emmett Till's mother. I needed to figure out what type of mindset she was in and if she was still really fighting for justice for her son. And at the time, I hadn't really heard anything about her. Saw a few websites that talk about her and her movement, but it wasn't until I picked up the phone and actually called her when I realized that she was still stronger than ever and had been fighting for over 40 years to get justice for her son. And so, being that I was young, I was 22 at the time, um, I became this sponge. And she actually nurtured me into this filmmaker activist that I've become. And of course, it's been a long ride for myself. I been telling this story for over 27 years, trying to get people to understand that not only that we're still fighting for justice for the murder of Emmett Till, but to put this story in its proper context in American history. So often we talk about the civil rights movement, and Emmett Till's name is always put in the back burner, or you never really hear about his story. Only until recent years or 2 decades or so, I would have to say that we start seeing Emmett Till's name rising in popular culture now. And so every time, and you mentioned this, Herb, every time you hear of a young Black male who is unarmed and shot by police, Emmett Till's name, even armed, let me not say that, even armed, Emmett Till's name always metaphorically comes back to fruition. And people wonder why. Well, you have to look at the story of Emmett Till and truly understand how the civil rights movement actually began. Now, many will argue that the civil rights movement has been going on for a long period of time. That is true. But before we know this term, begin to understand the term civil rights and use it loosely like we do now, the Emmett Till murder actually came out of the Black resistance movement, the so-called freedom movement. And so when the movement began to mobilize and it became civil rights, that's when the term began to be used over and over again. And so I guess I can stop here. I don't want to just, because this is like a therapy session for me. I could go on and on and on, but I'm interested in getting to some of these questions because I know we only have a small window of time. And if we have some time after we answer some of these questions, then I will continue to talk as well. All right?
Hi, everyone. My name is Carla Lamb. I work at City of Asylum, and I will be getting the audience questions to this chat between Herb and Keith. So the first question from the audience is, let's see, I have to actually switch screens here. So another question, can you talk about your thoughts on police reform and the defunding the police movement, given the foundational legacy of injustice in the U.S. legal system?
Well, I like everyone, I think we need to have police reform, but one, we should understand the history of policing in this country. I don't think people really truly understand. And when I say that is because, the policing that we recognize to be policing, the policing of this country, actually started with the Slave Patrol of South Carolina. And so what I'm trying to get people to understand, when you have an organization or a department such as the police department coming out of something so negative, then what you're going to expect years down the line. What we're seeing is a transgenerational issue. This is not going to change overnight. I like everyone. I still believe in police reform, but I want to give people realism here to understand that this is something that is going to take some time to correct, because what we're seeing is not just the police brutality on Black people or whoever. What you're actually dealing with is racism as a whole. And so racism, I know many of us are fighting this social ill, but let's be realistic about it. Racism, unfortunately, is going to always be here. Man is always going to have prejudice against man, whether it's a color or how much money someone has, or so on. But what we need to start doing is actually teaching tolerance. Tolerance is more of an attainable goal than trying to kill the social ill of racism. And so, Herb, I know you probably have a few words. Please, sir, if you have a few words, go ahead.
Well, Keith, you're absolutely right about that in terms of it's going to be with us for a while. I mean, systemic racism, you're talking about 401 years, something embedded in our system. So it doesn't happen overnight that you can remove such a long-standing system of oppression. It's incrementally done. I mean, we've had the civil rights movement, even before the civil rights movement, and I think you did properly in terms of contextualizing this historically and taking it back. Emmett Till comes on the scene on the pages of history in 1955. Now, Rosa Parks, on December the 1st, 1955, she said when she took a stand by refusing to go to the back of the bus, she said Emmett Till was on her mind. So right away you have a conjunction, the confluence, the civil rights movement with a horrendous incident in Money, Mississippi. And before that, we can go all the way back to the long night of slavery or enslavement in this country. The abolitionist movement, it's got to be seen in that context in terms of this resistance. One of the things, Keith, that's often missing in the discourse of American history, certainly our story, we have to tell our own story, obviously. But one of the things that's missing is that the whole nature and the persistence of resistance, that's always been a part about struggle for liberation in this country. So the civil rights movement, it picks up, it's stimulated, and some people feel that Emmett Till's the brutalization of him was a catalyst. It certainly fed into something that was beginning to slowly emerge and gain international attention, thanks to Dr. King, the kind of vision that he brought. And he was a consummate organizer. He knew exactly how to stage events or take advantage of the atrocities and made sure that a broader audience saw exactly what was going on. And I think that's what you have done over the years with your career, is beginning to put the spotlight, put the camera, dig into the archives, go to these repositories, the museums, the libraries, and do these interviews that you've done over the years and begin to kind of present something that should not be dead, because you are an activist journalist, filmmaker, you are a historian in the highest sense of the word.
Mm.
Thank you. Thank you,
Yeah.
Herb.
Yeah. Okay, here are a couple more questions from the audience. So Emmett Till has come back to the forefront in the wake of police abuses. What can activists, sorry, I lost the question. What can activists do to engage and especially teach children about Emmett's murder?
Well, the first step was tonight. You were able to watch this film. The film is streaming on Amazon. It's free on YouTube. You could get access to this film and share it. Secondly, I want people to understand that the Emmett Till case is reactivated. We're still fighting for justice for Emmett Till. One of the things that was discovered, I shouldn't say one of the things, some of the things that was discovered along the way during my journey of producing this film, I discovered there was more people involved with the kidnapping and murder of Emmett Lewis Till, which is the reason why the case was reopened in 2004. I worked closely with the FBI on this investigation, and where many of us thought we were going to be able to see a couple of the perpetrators being prosecuted for the crime. But unfortunately, that did not happen. But in 2017, there was a book that was released by Dr. Tim Tyson, The Murder of the Blood of Emmett Till, I should say. And in this book, he basically stated that, or should I say, alleged that Carolyn Bryant Dunham, I have to say the last person alive who actually was a participant in the kidnapping and murder of Emmett Till. He basically said that he alleged that she confessed in terms of her involvement in the case. And so the case was reactivated soon after we got word of this. And now we're waiting to hear something from the Justice Department as well as the state. So I want people to understand that this case is still a breathing animal, and we must see justice done. That's the only way I can see some type of step towards racial reconciliation. I can't even say it tonight. Hold on, reconciliation. So, but it's very important because before we can have racial reconciliation, we must have truth. And that's very important, not only to the family of Emmett Till, but many of us who have known this story since we were kids, and this story has become a very big part of our lives. So it's very important.
And it resonates at this moment in a very critical way in terms of legislation, because the House unanimously passed in making it lynching a federal crime. Senator Rand Paul out of Kentucky kind of threw a monkey wrench in there and stalled the whole process. I'm not sure exactly where that is at this point, but we have been struggling in this country, Keith, as you know so well, for more than a century, going all the way back to the Dyer anti-lynching law. during the
Yes.
time of Booker T. Washington, the early days of the NAACP. So now you reach this here critical point, this historical watershed where these legislators, and particularly out of Chicago, to see that what the
Yep.
Congressman Bobby Rush out of Chicago introduced that, and it was like 400-4 in terms of what happened in the House, and then the Senate stalled on that. But that's an important facet in terms of Emmett Till's legacy, is that now it begins to resonate in the halls of justice in the House of Congress.
I'm glad you mentioned that, Herb, because,
Mhm.
again, when I started, I talk about the importance of putting Emmett Till's case in the proper historic context. 1954, you had Brown versus Board of Education ending, of course, segregation in public schools. Out of that huge landmark decision, won by the NAACP, of course, out of that came the formation of the Citizens Councils of the South. And they were there to counter integration, to fight against integration, whether it's through voting or what they call racial mingling and so on. So this is actually the atmosphere Emmett Till walks into in 1955. 3 months and 2 weeks prior to Emmett's arrival, you had the murders of Reverend George Lee out of Belzoni, Mississippi, that happened in May of 1955. Reverend George Lee was shot and killed. He was an NAACP official trying to register Black voters. He was actually the first registered Black voter in Humphreys County. He was shot and killed on his way home after a speaking engagement. Then you had the murder of Lamar Smith that happened in Brookhaven, Mississippi. Lamar Diddley Smith, civil rights activist, a very, very good man to the community. He was shot in the courthouse lawn in broad daylight. This happened in 2 weeks before Emmett Till's arrival, in front of what they said about 100 people. He shot and killed. No one was ever brought to justice with these two murders. And so this is the atmosphere Emmett Till walks into. And of course, he takes his faithful whistle at the store that day when he encounters Carolyn Bryant Dunham. And so when I talk about the context, I mean, it is very important to know that the movement that actually followed Emmett Till's murder was not a coincidence. It was carefully calculated. The biggest thing for the NAACP after Brown versus Board of Education decision was to have anti-lynching legislature passed. And so when Emmett's murder takes place, he becomes the perfect poster child to the anti-lynching movement, which is why you had every civil rights organization on the same accord fighting for justice for Emmett Till. And so what we're seeing today, and I've been getting a lot of these questions, are we in our Emmett Till moment? I continue to say perhaps, because I don't truly believe that people really understand how the civil rights movement came along. And so if we could arguably say that the civil rights movement was the greatest movement ever created by citizens of this country, the biggest and the most successful, then you must look at the story of Emmett Till and understand his case.
Yeah,
Well
absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. We have a couple more questions from the audience. One is, what advice would you both give to future filmmakers and activists?
Herb, go ahead first, because Herb.
Well, I think that a real primer, an introduction to that process is some of the viewers, if they really pay attention to the kind of technique, insight, and vision that Keith has brought. Keith mentioned a couple of cases, cold cases, he should also, we should also know that he has done countless number of documentaries. It's more than just Emmett Till. I mean, our archives are replete with these dastardly deeds, these cowardly acts. And I worked with Keith on at least 10 of them, and on different channels on television. And so if we can go back and just study what Keith has done, I think that's would be a pretty good beginning. Get an introduction to what young filmmakers can be doing today and what is important. I know that Ava DuVernay and Stanley Nelson, it's a slew of young, enterprising and visionary filmmakers out there that we can learn from. We can teach each other
Mhm.
and look at your colleagues around you. You don't have to look all the way back in the history logs, but just study what's around you and begin to kind of pick up the camera. We have so many citizens journalists going on these days. Just about
Right.
everybody's walking around with a camera, and that's very helpful because we need to grab some of these fragments, stitch them together, and begin to see this whole cloth of the systemic racism and white supremacy that we're immersed in at this point. I know the pandemic has put a stall on a whole lot of activism, but I'm glad to know that this kind of streaming process, the platforms that we're provided in a virtual way, we can continue this dialogue because that's certainly a part of the process, the whole learning process, the creative process. And we have to kind of pay attention, and you have to pay close attention, as one of my colleagues would say, in terms of what's going on in our country and how we can begin to extrapolate from that and stitch
Mhm.
it together in such a way that we can have a product that is part of a teaching moment. This is a teaching moment that we're going through right now. And I think, Keith, the syllabus that you provided with your work is something that just absolutely remarkably admirable, and I think it's just indispensable in terms of young filmmakers to just go ahead, log in, check out Keith Beauchamp.
Well, Herb,
Mhm.
you're a little modest yourself, award-winning journalist, author Herb Boyd. Um, I have to say it's great to have Herb in my corner. A lot of my people around me are pioneers of this movement. And I confide in Herb and others to keep me on the right track, which is why I do the work that I do. I used to call myself an unintentional filmmaker because I never really thought I was supposed to do this work. I never thought about being a filmmaker. I always wanted to be a civil rights attorney. And it just so happened my childhood friends moved to New York and started their own film production company. And that's how I was introduced to the powerful medium of filmmaking. Filmmaking to me is the new wave of activism. No more should we have to rely on our leadership and community members to talk about atrocities because nothing hits you more than a visual. It was the visual of Emmett Till that basically inspired me to do a lot of the work that I do. And it's that vision, it's that same medium that I'm trying to bring to the world so it can have that same type of effect. And so it's been a blessing to be able to use filmmaking as my activism tool. And that's what I use it as. So I would like to encourage all these future filmmakers. Look, you don't have to have millions of dollars to make a difference. You don't have to have the best of equipment to make a difference. You can actually shoot your film with your cell phone. I mean, Herb said it best. But I just want to encourage you to understand that we live in the most politically conscious generation of any day. And regardless of all that is happening right now, if you are an archivist, if you're a filmmaker, this is an opportunity for you to go out there and create. Everything around you on a daily now is something to be recorded. And so this is one of the most exciting times in my life. And so, and it's also, I have to be honest, is also one of those times where I'm confused and suffering from a number of things because of the pain that we're continuing to see around this country. And so just be encouraged, go out, understand your subject, know how to tell a story. That's the most important tip I could give anyone. Know how to tell a story, beginning, middle, and end.
Yeah, I completely agree with you. I have two more questions from the audience. One quick one is this film translated into any other languages? And this question is from Jackie. She would like to share the film with her mom, who is an immigrant of to this country, and she has found that film provides her mom and the Latino community with a platform that they can really relate to. So, are there any possibilities of this film being translated at all?
We're working on that as we speak.
Okay, great.
And so something will be out pretty soon. And I would just like to ask, of course, your audience member to follow me, and I will keep you updated.
Okay, great. And one last question from the audience. So this is from Stephanie. When I think of Emmett Till, I think of Tamir Rice and others. We have been fighting the same battles for so long. I feel like the stress of the fight and living in this country is too much. What do you tell yourself when you get discouraged or angry?
Well, that's a good question because you can get a lot of frustration. I just mentioned that I'm going through some things myself on a mental level. A lot of that has to do with me and the work that I've been continuously doing since I was 22. And sometimes I know the feeling, sometimes, and Herb could attest to this, it feels like you're on this lonely road by yourself, but you've got to keep going. I've often asked, Keith, if you could live life differently, would you? I say no. I would never change the Black experience that I've had, or even the Black experience my ancestors and forefathers and mothers had as well. It's why I live on a daily. I wake up in the morning fighting, you know. If we lived in a place of utopia, right, that everyone dreams about often, man wouldn't have a reason to live. And so for me, getting up on a daily and understanding the fight that we must continue, and I have to say this because a lot of people don't understand, the civil rights movement was made to never end. It wasn't something that ended when Dr. King passed away. This is an ongoing movement. And so we have to understand that. But most importantly, again, if life was so great, man would not have a reason to live. And so getting up every morning, and I just been, again, blessed because I've been doing this work since I was 22. And Emmett Till was the catalyst of that. There would not be a Emmett Till, a filmmaker who done the Emmett Till story, if not for the murder of Emmett Till, and of course, Mother Mobley really instilling me in these values, and my parents are speaking for those who can no longer speak for themselves. So that's my answer. I just want to encourage everyone who's on the front lines, who are activists or archivists, to continue on, because the fight continues.
Okay, great. Thank you so much for that. For your thoughts and for your words and for your work. I'd like to introduce somebody from the Satirical Film Festival. This is Ogechi is going to join us for some final comments.
Hello.
Hi, everyone. Thank you. I just want to say thank you so much. This has been so inspiring. On behalf of myself, Mike Hill, and the family of Sabira Cole, thank you everyone who worked so hard at the City of Asylum for supporting Saban and for supporting Sabira Cole Film Festival. I want to thank Henry Reese for his kind recognition of Sabira's contributions to the arts in the city of Pittsburgh. Without that, we wouldn't be here. Thank you to Herb Boyd for being such a comfort to our family when Sabira passed.
Yes.
Thank you to Keith Beauchamp for allowing us to do this authentic document to the next generation of filmmakers and activists. I'm so proud to present this, and I'm glad it could all come together. And thank you to everyone who took the time to attend tonight, who keeps the memory of Sabira alive and the dream of justice alive. In the words of my aunt, a luta continua. So thank you so much.
Thank you both. Thank you all. It's our pleasure to work with you. And thank
Saluta continua.
Luta continua.
Okay.
All right. Well, I think that's a wrap. Thank you all for your words, your work, your contribution. It's so meaningful and so needed. So on behalf of City of Asylum, thank you all. And we'll be in touch. We're going to be working together. And thank you to our audience. And I hope everybody has a great night.
Thank you.
Long live Sabira. Thank you.
Thank you.